Alright, what's going on, guys? This might actually be the craziest gaming leak I've ever seen. I literally could not believe my eyes when I was reading this, and I didn't think it was real, but unfortunately it is, and here we are. Now, it feels like this year gaming companies have been getting hit with hacks left and right. We had the GTA leaks, we had the Wolverine leaks, among several others, but the latest victim is Pokemon. Now, I don't talk about it much here on the channel, but I am a big Pokemon fan. I've been playing the games my entire life, and still do, and I'm really looking forward to the next release of Legends ZA, which was announced earlier this year and set to release in 2025, but now it seems like that may be changed, because the company that makes the Pokemon games, GameFreak, which after this leak that name makes a lot more sense, if you know you know, but we'll get into it, they have just been hit with one of the biggest data breaches of a game company of all time. And before we even get into the crazy stuff, this is crazy right here as well. The hackers claim to have a full playable version of Legends ZA, but we're going to get into everything. We're going to break this all down, starting with an overview of the situation as a whole for those of you that aren't aware yet. To give a general summary of the situation, Polygon writes, GameFreak, the primary developer of the Pokemon games, has suffered a serious data breach. Employees' personal details have been published online, as well as a huge trove of documentation on Pokemon, including source code for complete builds of past games. And as we're going to discuss in a minute, that's not even scratching the surface of this leak. In a statement, GameFreak said the leak was a result of unauthorized access to our servers by a third party, and did apologize for the release of over 2,600 items of personal data. It said the breach took place in August, and that the affected server had already been rebuilt. Information obtained from the leaked files began to appear widely on Saturday and Sunday, and GameFreak's statement surfaced online on Sunday. However, the statement is dated Thursday, October 10th. The statement addresses the leak of employees' personal details, but does not mention the release of any confidential game data. Now, tons of confidential game data did leak, and I think it was right by GameFreak to not address that, because I don't know how they cover themselves for what's now out in the public, because this is honestly just insane. Now, there was some pretty harmless stuff that leaked, such as Gen 3 beta sprites for several of the Pokemon, a lot of the prototypes of the past games, including actual builds of some of those prototypes, several scrapped Pokemon altogether, as well as the rest of the Pokemon anime story, which has not aired on television yet. Now, from a company standpoint, that's a nightmare already. If I'm GameFreak, I'd be freaking out over that, even though those aren't necessarily things that affect the consumer. But what does affect the consumer, and I think they are probably panicking about more than anything right now, is that the hacker claims to have a full playable version of their next game, Legends ZA. Now, Legends ZA was revealed earlier this year, which is another spin-off game by GameFreak, in the same style as Legends Arceus if you played that, which has a more mature theme and feel to the game and is more action-oriented than the mainline Pokemon games. And Legends Arceus actually attracted a lot more players, and people seem to really like that game. I personally loved it, and it was refreshing to get a new take on Pokemon than the same game formula that we've been playing for the last 20 years. So people are obviously really anticipating this next entry, and there's a ton of hype around it. But as is being reported, the individual behind the massive GameFreak data breach has a playable PC build of the upcoming mainline Pokemon game, Legends ZA, which we have yet seen nothing of. Despite the stolen builds, bugs, and lag, the build can apparently be played from start to finish. The hacker says that it is very enjoyable even with the lag, and that they're not planning to release any more details about it. Now, that is the fortunate news in all of this. Thankfully, they're not planning on spoiling the game, but the problem here is that they could. Realistically, this hacker could release this build that they have to the public. People could either emulate it, or if it is PC playable as they say, play it themselves. And clearly, that is a worst case scenario for the company. Now, as a player, when I hear that, I am a little bit curious about the game since we haven't seen anything about it yet, but at the same time, that's a nightmare for spoilers of the game. Because realistically, we could still be a year out from release, and now you're telling me that somebody has the entire game? I don't trust them to keep their mouth shut about it. You know, it's fun every now and then to talk about leaks or leaks of a game come out that everyone's eagerly anticipating, and they're small, they get the speculation going, but when it's the entire game, that's a bit different. Now, only time will tell what they choose to actually do with what they have on their hands. Hopefully they don't end up spoiling Legends ZA for everybody. But that's not even the craziest part of all this. If you've been on the internet at all, you've likely seen some of the memes going around. Hashtag cancel Typhlosion. Typhlosion was at the Diddy parties. Typhlosion's on the Epstein flight logs. Well, that's because a big part of this leak was actually Pokemon lore. files and folders full of Pokemon lore and stories written about the Pokemon. And while a lot of it was lore that was already speculated about, really cool stuff that tells about the origin of the Pokemon universe and such, a lot of this lore that was uncovered was absolutely disgusting and detestable stories written about the Pokemon having intimate relations with humans. No, that's not a joke. Unfortunately, it is real. You could basically compile a short novel of all of these that were uncovered. And of course, the one that got shared around the most and has become the meme is Typhlosion. And man, this makes me mad because Typhlosion was legitimately my favorite Pokemon, and now he's got to beat the allegations. So I'll give you the general overview of what the Typhlosion story is. I'm obviously not going to read it, but essentially a girl gets lost in the woods and encounters a Typhlosion. The Typhlosion then lures her into its cave, and she ends up staying in the cave with the Typhlosion convincing her that it will help her. And of course, several things happen throughout the story, but then at the end, the girl then gives birth to a half Typhlosion, half human hybrid, and well, that's the story. We don't have to go into detail about that, but they're all like that. A lot of the stories are that graphic, twisted and weird, and extremely questionable. So what on earth are those doing on GameFreak servers and company files? And I'm seeing a lot of people say, well, don't you remember back in Gen 1, Gen 2? The Pokédex entries were really dark. It's always been like this. But as someone that's played all of the games, I can say, not like that. Not that much. If we're trying to defend Typhlosion here, I think there's a better way. Now, one defense that I have seen trying to explain the situation behind all these really grotesque stories is that these were originally folklore tales replaced with Pokemon. And I can say at least the way they're written does kind of sound like that. I could see it. I haven't done all the research yet, but even if that is true, why do they still have it? Clearly that's not being referenced in any of the games, so why is that still applicable lore keeping on company files? To me, it's just weird and gross. Especially since Pokemon is primarily a kid's game. I know people don't like to admit that, but it's true. That's not something that should ever be in the game, that explicitly. It's just weird. But I would like to see a real explanation. I highly doubt GameFreak would make any kind of public statement about that, but we'll just have to wait and see on that regard. Again, man, as a Typhlosion fan, you hate to see it. I remember spending like a year hunting for a shiny Cyndaquil over a decade ago. I just transferred him all the way up to Scarlet and Violet. Now what do I do with him? I don't know, man, he might be getting released. But regarding the leak as a whole, it is fun to talk about these things, and it is cool to see the never before seen Pokemon designs or the new unreleased Pokemon. But one thing that tends to get lost in the discussion is that a lot of employee data was leaked. A lot of their personal info. These are people that are just trying to work on the game and do their job, and now they have to worry about things like identity theft or all their info getting leaked on the internet. That should never happen, and under no circumstances is that okay, and we don't need to forget and think that the hacker is doing some kind of justice, whether that's to get back at GameFreak because they didn't like the new Pokemon games, or if they're being too quiet about Legends ZA. It's not okay. It's a crime. And honestly, with Nintendo and Pokemon's track record in dealing with these things, I'd be pretty terrified if I was that hacker. Anyways though guys, I just had to come on here and talk about this today because this is a crazy situation. Y'all let me know what you think down in the comment section below, but with all that, I will catch you in the next one.